Last New Year's marked my 4-year anniversary with my boyfriend. We typically haven't done much to celebrate in the past, so we decided to plan a special romantic getaway. At the time, the two of us were living in Massachusetts. After some brainstorming, we searched for cabins on Airbnb in Vermont, since it's notorious for having a lot of snow in the winter. We came across a beautiful cabin that was tucked away in the woods that had a hot tub. The cabin was owned by an older guy named Jerry, who was new to Airbnb. It had 3 5-star reviews, and after reading them, we were sold. We decided to drive, since my boyfriend had a heavy-duty truck that was great in the snow. As we neared our final 10 minutes of the drive, I lost connection on my phone, which ended up lasting the entire weekend. After punching in the address on my boyfriend's phone, we were able to continue the final minutes of our journey. Once we were 5 minutes away, the GPS took us down a remote, private road that ended in a roundabout. We took the road until it dead-ended, where we found our cabin. It was located on top of a hill, so the driveway was very long and steep. Once we pulled in, I was shocked at how beautiful the cabin looked. It was covered in snow, and the thick, white smoke gently arose from the chimney. The cabin itself sat on top of a garage, so we had to walk up the icy stairs on the backside of the property to get to the front door. When we got inside, we found a little booklet with all of the cabin's information outlined. It gave a friendly warning to the guests that the contracted plowers would come and clear the driveway every time it snowed, so we shouldn't be alarmed. We unpacked and settled in, as we realized that there was no service on my boyfriend's phone either. However, the booklet told us there was a landline in the cabin's kitchen if we ever needed anything. We spent the first night by the fire, mostly playing board games and watching Christmas movies. The weekend started off exactly how we pictured it. We planned to spend the next day exploring the town, then go to a nice restaurant where I had booked a reservation for a nice dinner. We were mostly gone the entire day, only returning briefly to get dressed for dinner. The restaurant was great, and we were excited to head back to the cabin and relax in the hot tub. After dinner, we realized that the temperature had dropped and it snowed for the first time that day, coating everything in a fresh layer of powder. We drove down the private road and got to the driveway. At that point, my boyfriend stopped the car with his headlights shining in front and asked me if I noticed the new tire tracks. I looked at the driveway, hoping to quickly disregard the new tire tracks, but they were definitely fresh and certainly not ours. Immediately, we remembered that the snowplowers could have stopped by, but it didn't add up because the driveway was obviously not plowed. It definitely creeped me out a bit, so my boyfriend decided to drive us back into town and message our Airbnb host to ask if he stopped by the cabin. We waited for a while in town for a reply from our hosts, but we didn't hear back. We could have called, but at that point, it was past 10, and my boyfriend convinced me that I was overreacting. I figured I blew the whole thing out of proportion, and might as well head back to the cabin. After all, I'm really big into true crime, spooky subreddits, and horror movies, so I was probably just psyching myself out. My boyfriend drove us back, and we pulled in all the way and parked in the garage. As I got out, my stomach dropped as I noticed there were fresh footprints on the driveway. This reignited my anxiety, and I quickly called my boyfriend over to look. From what it looked like, someone had driven up the driveway, reversed down, parked, and then got out of the car and walked onto the property. Since we had now also driven on the tracks, we couldn't find where the footprints ended. The property was quite large, with tons of trees and brush surrounding the cabin, so my imagination raced as I wondered where the footprints went. I guess my panicked state rubbed off on my boyfriend, so we figured it was better to be safe than sorry to call the police and have them search the cabin. We drove down the road until we got service, then called the police and waited for their arrival. The policeman showed up shortly after, and we followed him onto the property. He scanned the entire property and determined there was no one out there. Obviously, we were a little shaken up and embarrassed. Needless to say, neither of us wanted to sit in the hot tub in the dark woods after what had happened. Instead, we locked the doors and watched a movie until we finally calmed down and laughed at our paranoia. As the night went on, we felt the exhaustion from the long day and passed out in the living room. Around 3 a.m., we both woke up on the couch with the TV and all the lights on. I'm not sure what woke us up, but we quickly chalked it up to a log popping in the fireplace. We laughed about how the night didn't turn out as planned and got up to go sleep in the bedroom. As my boyfriend went to brush his teeth, I heard a noise. It sounded like a mechanical humming, and it only lasted a few seconds. My boyfriend quickly ran into our room, and I instantly knew he heard the same noise from the expression on his face. In a trembling voice, I said, "Was that the garage?" And he nodded his head. There are literally no reasons that someone would need to open the garage door of a guest-occupied Airbnb at 3 in the morning. Like I said, we woke up to all of our lights on, and the cabin had a lot of windows. We knew that if someone was outside, they would know we were there, since they could see us. As we sat there, frozen in shock, we heard the door to the garage unlock. Luckily, my boyfriend carries a pistol, so he quickly got it out of the suitcase and loaded it. As we continued listening, it was obvious that there were footsteps slowly walking around the living room. My boyfriend decided to check it out, despite my pleas not to, so I closely followed behind him down the hallway towards the living room. There, with his back turned away from us and his head facing down, was an unknown man in our cabin. With my boyfriend's pistol drawn, he told him to turn around slowly, startling the man who did not expect us to be standing behind him. As he did, with his hands raised in the air, I immediately recognized him. It was the owner of the cabin. In a stern tone, my boyfriend asked, "What are you doing here?" In which he replied, "I didn't know you guys were here already." His face was red as can be, projecting his shock and utter embarrassment that he got caught. The worst part about it was that he was holding a cheap camera in his hand, which he presumably brought to spy on us and take pictures. My boyfriend kept his gun drawn as I ran over to the landline and called the police. They arrived shortly after, and we explained the situation to them. The officer detained the man, where he was brought to the police station for questioning. After dealing with the police, we packed up our bags and checked into a hotel. The worst part about it was that the host was never arrested. They simply let him go after somehow convincing the police he marked our date to stay for next week in his calendar, despite breaking tenancy laws. Disgusted and upset, we notified Airbnb of the situation and were given a refund, in addition to banning him from listing his house on the site. I don't know what his exact intentions were, but they certainly were not good. A few years ago, I moved into a small, one-story house in Northern California. The neighborhood was just outside the suburbs. It seemed like the perfect balance of having space not too close to the neighboring houses and not too far from the nearby stores and restaurants. The area had no streetlights, so it was very dark at night, especially if there were clouds blocking the moonlight. It didn't bother me though. It made my little house feel even more quaint on the dark nights. I'm a nurse, so I often get stuck working on holidays, but I don't mind since I don't have much family. Like always, I worked Christmas Eve and Christmas Day and found out that I had to work on New Year's Eve as well. I ended up working overtime and got home sometime around 7 at night. It was a cloudy night, so as I pulled up to my house, I was only able to see what my headlights and front porch light illuminated. When I got out of my car, I caught a whiff of cigarette smoke. It was odd, since I had never smelled that before around my house. I didn't see anyone nearby, so I ignored it and went inside. I was exhausted from my shift, so I decided to take a shower and call it a night. I woke up sometime later, after I heard a noise inside my house. I wasn't worried right away though, because my friend would sometimes stop by to use my shower after work on his way to his night classes. I even gave him a spare key so he could stop by even if I wasn't home. He would always text me to let me know beforehand though, and I hadn't heard my phone go off. I reached over to my bedside table and picked up my cell phone to see if my friend had sent me a text. The bright light from my phone's screen and number pad blinded me. These were the days before phones had a light sensor that would dim the screen in the dark, and this particular phone was so bright I could use it as a flashlight. Through squinted eyes, I could make out that it was 9:30, and I had a notification that my friend texted me. I set my phone aside and called out my friend's name. There were a couple seconds of silence before I heard loud footsteps as someone started running through the bottom floor of my house. I leapt out of bed and ran to the closet. They were already up the stairs by the time I had opened the door and stepped inside. The house had 3 rooms upstairs, 2 bedrooms on either side of the hallway, the one I was in, a spare bedroom, and a bathroom at the end. The bedroom doors were both closed, but the bathroom door was cracked open. I heard whoever was in my house thunder down the hallway, past my door and into the bathroom. Despite my sheer panic, I quickly devised a plan, realizing that I'd have enough time to open the attic access in the ceiling of my closet and hoist myself up. I had just started to lift myself up when the person ran back out of the bathroom. My feet were barely inside of the attic when my bedroom door burst open. I heard footsteps run into my room and stop. When they didn't see me in that room, they ran back to the hallway and into the other room, which just had boxes stacked in a corner, some weights, and a table where I had my paintings. I guess the person decided that if someone was hiding, it would be in the bedroom, because they immediately charged back into my room and turned on the light. A moment later, the closet door was ripped open. I was crouched in my attic, just a foot or so away from the access, so I could try to stop them if they started to climb up. From my vantage point, I could only see from about their knees down. The person was wearing dirty blue jeans with frayed cuffs and worn work boots. After a few seconds of looking in the closet, they stepped away and I heard a loud crash come from my room, followed by a scream of frustration and anger. The scream was the most unnerving part of the incident for me. It reminded me far too much of my stepfather, who would scream in a similar way when he lost his temper. He would eventually be put in a mental hospital for several mental disorders that resulted in erratic and violent tendencies. The man in my house ran back down the stairs. I heard crashes and clatters as things were thrown around and furniture was knocked over. I had left my cell phone when I ran for the closet, and I wasn't certain I'd be able to climb down without him hearing. After some time, the noises stopped. I started counting to 1,000, attempting to keep my mind focused and gauge the time. When I reached 1,000, I decided it was safe enough to climb down and call the police. The first thing I noticed when I exited the closet was that the intruder had flipped my bed over, I assume in an attempt to find me. That was the loud noise I had heard after he had stepped away from the closet. I couldn't find my cell phone, so I went to the landline by the bed and called the police. I waited in my room until I heard them call out from downstairs. The first floor was a mess, but I expected that. The chairs had been knocked over, and the sofa had been flipped. All the books, pictures, and knickknacks I had on my shelves were strewn across the floor. The cupboards in the kitchen had been open, and all the boxed and canned foods had been thrown to the ground. As far as I could tell, though, the only thing missing was a single knife out of the wooden block in my kitchen. The police checked the house from top to bottom. They found that the side door had been forced open by something like a crowbar. They also found a few cigarette butts along my fence line, along with some foil and an empty pen tube which the police said people often use to do drugs. So they assumed he had been watching my house for a while. I realized that he must have been out there smoking a cigarette when I got home. They collected up the evidence and told me I should stay with family or friends that night and to get the door fixed as soon as possible. I opted to just not sleep. I moved a shelf over to block the broken door and spent the next couple hours cleaning things up. I would often go to the window with the flashlight and shine it along the fence line where the police had found the cigarette butts and foil, but I didn't see anything. The next day, I called to have the door fixed and got motion lights installed at the back and sides of my house. I ran a phone cable up into the attic and added a landline. I never wanted to be stuck up there without a phone again. Nothing else happened at the house though. I lived there another 3 years without any incident. I try not to think about what could have happened to me if I had been a bit slower getting to the attic, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't cross my mind every time I crawl in bed at night. Last New Year's, my girlfriend and I were driving home from our friend's New Year's house party. We live in the city, so the drive from his house in the suburbs to our apartment was about 20 minutes away. It was around 1:30 a.m. There were definitely more cars than usual at this time of night, given that everyone was out celebrating the New Year. As soon as we got on the highway, I noticed a car that was trailing us very closely as I merged on the entrance ramp. I stayed in the far right lane, as I waited for them to go around and pass us. However, the car continued to follow directly behind us, tailgating us to the point where they looked to be inches behind our bumper. "Did you cut them off or something?" my girlfriend asked, as she noticed the car tailing us unusually close as well. I said no, as I flipped on my turn signal to merge over to the middle lane on the left. The car didn't merge into our lane after I moved over, so we just assumed it was a bad driver. We continued on for another few miles, but I noticed that the car was still following behind us in the other lane. Our exit was coming up, so I sped up to get over, since the car was preventing us from switching lanes. Right as I did this, they immediately sped up, matching our speed. They were now directly to the right of us, and I looked over to see what the person was doing, but I couldn't see anything because the windows were darkly tinted. but I was able to make out that it was a cherry red Mustang. Out of frustration, I slammed on the brakes, giving me enough room to merge over as the car was now in front of us. We realized that the car didn't have a license plate or any sort of temporary tag. The car continued driving, and at this point, my girlfriend and I speculated that it was either a drunk driver with his friends or some lunatic. As we got off the exit, the car did too. They stayed in front of us, aggressively weaving back and forth as we pulled up to the light. I didn't put my turn signal on, since I wanted to see where they were going. The car didn't use a turn signal either, and it continued to slow down, almost as if they were waiting to see where we went. Since we didn't want to be out driving all night, I got in the right turning lane, and finally flipped on my blinker. The car did the same, as it cut us off to get in the lane in front of us again. My girlfriend started getting worried, but I assured her it was probably some punk kids trying to mess with people in their cars. This went on for at least another 5 minutes straight, as we watched the car turn everywhere we went. Once we were within a couple minutes away from the apartment, I really wanted to get away from the car so they didn't know where we lived. As we were driving straight in a 25-mile-per-hour zone, with the car still in front of us, I stepped on the brakes and made a quick U-turn, then drove in the opposite direction away from them. My trick seemed to have worked, as we were now at least 50 yards away from the car. I planned on cutting through some side streets, then looping back around to the main road. Just as I thought they had given up messing with us, I watched in my rearview mirror as the car turned around and began approaching us again. They had to be going at least 100 miles per hour, because they shrunk the distance between us in half within a matter of seconds. Admittedly, I was pretty freaked out now, but I tried to appear calm on the outside because my girlfriend was totally freaking out. I picked up my phone and dialed 911, since we basically exhausted all of our options. As I was explaining everything on the phone with the dispatcher, I shut off my lights and cut down a side street in an attempt to lose the car. However, it didn't work because the car turned down the street shortly after. I sped through the little neighborhood as I tried everything I could to shake the car off of us. The dispatcher told us to stay in the car and drive to the police station, where they'd have officers waiting in the parking lot. The police station was a few miles away, so I began driving towards it as I stayed on the line with her. As we turned back onto the main road, there were several cars driving by, which I hoped would make the car stop following us, since there were other people around, but it didn't. As we approached the intersection, the light turned red at the last second, causing the cars in front of us to come to a sudden stop. With a short amount of time, I had no way of getting around them and was forced to make a complete stop. The adrenaline was coursing through my body as I watched the car pull up behind us with their high beams on. The light was blinding, but I was able to see at least 3 masked people get out of the car and approach us. I didn't know what else to do, so I laid on the horn, hoping that one of the cars in front would realize what was going on and move. One of the masked people ran up to the passenger side door and smashed the window, and tried pulling my girlfriend out of the car. Hearing her bone-chilling scream still gives me chills just thinking about it. Almost as if a miracle happened, the car directly in front of us sped through the red light after realizing what was happening, allowing us to drive forward. After narrowly avoiding a car accident from the intersecting lanes, we got through the intersection and sped towards the police station, all while trying to tell the dispatcher what happened. Thankfully, the scene deterred the car from following us, and we got away. Unfortunately, we were never able to provide the police a solid description of the suspects, other than mentioning that there were at least 3 masked people in an unmarked cherry red Mustang. As far as we know, they were never caught. To this day, neither of us know why those people followed us, especially for as long as they did. It really was a freak incident, and I guess we were in the wrong place at the wrong time. But my girlfriend and I are just thankful that the car in front of us went through the red light, allowing us to escape.